It's time for the KBOI Medical Moment, brought to you by Regence Blue Shield of Idaho, featuring Dr. Mark Hiatt, the Executive Medical Director for Regence. Dr. Hiatt, good morning.
Good morning, Chris and David.
Dr. Hiatt, sometimes it's the most simple things that are also the most terrifying. A Boy Scout recently died during a camping trip in northeastern Utah. What happened?
David, this is a very sad story of a 17-year-old who actually would have been 18 this past Sunday.
Oh, wow.
He was a Boy Scout who became nauseous and got a headache this past Thursday night. He was still sick Friday when his group decided to break camp. This boy lost consciousness and collapsed on Saturday just as he and fellow scouts began hiking out to get the boy medical attention. Now, these were Boy Scouts. They knew CPR and they attempted on this scout, but they just simply could not revive him.
Now, there was a scout leader there as well. What did he do?
Yeah, he hiked several miles to try to get cell phone service in this remote place, and he called for help, and just unfortunately, this scout passed away before the life flight helicopter could arrive. And it's thought, Chris, that altitude sickness appears to have played some part in the death of this otherwise very healthy and active young man.
You know, when you say altitude sickness, I think of Mount Everest and stuff like that.
Machu Picchu. What
is it, and what are its dangers?
Well, altitude sickness, David, is caused by lower oxygen levels at high elevations. Typically, that starts around 8,000 feet, so not at the, 2,700 feet or so in Boise. But one known risk factor is when you rapidly ascend that high elevation, such as when you fly directly into a high-altitude city or if you climb too quickly on some mountain trek. Now, the human body can adapt to these higher altitudes. It's just that we've got to give the body several days to gradually do so.
Dr. Hiatt, what should we look for? What are some symptoms of altitude sickness?
Well, really, the mildest and most common form of altitude sickness is acute mountain sickness, in which you've got symptoms like this boy experienced: headache, nausea, fatigue, shortness of breath. A lot of people complain of having trouble sleeping and loss of appetite and dizziness. Now, exertion can make all of these symptoms worse. Unfortunately, sometimes this mild form of altitude sickness can progress to more severe illnesses involving edema of either the brain or the lungs. And both of these conditions can be life-threatening, and they require immediate medical attention.
If somebody's out hiking, what are some of the warning signs they should watch out for, Doctor?
Well, the key thing is breathlessness. Even when you're resting, even when you don't exert yourself, when you just can't breathe. Some people develop a cough with this frothy sputum. They may have gurgling in the chest, fever, confusion, just being drowsy and uncoordinated. So if your travel companion experiences any of these symptoms, you really need to quickly descend to a lower altitude and seek medical attention at once.
If you're going to the mountains, how can you prevent altitude sickness?
I think, Chris, the key is really to plan your trip. That's really the best way to prevent altitude sickness. And by that I mean, instead of flying directly into a high-altitude city and spending your first night there, consider descending to a lower elevation for the first few days of your trip. And then plan to really take it easy for those first few days. Now, altitude sickness typically strikes within the first 12 to 24 hours of exposure. So if during that time you can really acclimate yourself and your body to that higher elevation, that would be best for you.
So if you see somebody, if you have it or you see the person you're with have altitude sickness or it looks like they're getting the symptoms, what treatment can they do?
Well, so if you do develop, David, this altitude sickness, despite your best precautions, really the best treatment is rest and to avoid any further unnecessary exertion. A lot of people find relief through drinking plenty of water. You should, of course, abstain from alcohol and smoking, eat light meals. If you got a headache, ibuprofen can help. But most important is acknowledging that if you feel uncomfortable, if you have any of these symptoms, the key thing is not to try to push past them, but really just to admit that you're developing altitude sickness and just don't go to a higher altitude. Just come down from the mountain. And so really the most definitive treatment for altitude sickness is to descend and to get off the mountain.
Dr. Hiatt, thank you for joining us this morning on KBOI.
Thank you.
Have a great day, Doc.
It's the KBOI Medical Moment, brought to you by Regence Blue Shield of Idaho, every Tuesday, featuring Dr. Mark Hiatt, the Executive Medical Director for Regence.